Today I'm going to talk about the black and white settings and the partial color art filter on your Olympus camera. So I'm going to walk through all of the black and white settings on your Olympus camera and then segue that into the partial color art filter, because I think if you understand the black and white settings, the color art filter or the partial color art filter will just make a lot more sense. And these are the base settings I think available on all the Olympus cameras, so you should be able to follow along regardless of which model you have. I know that on my PL8, the PL7, EM10 Mark II, and my EM1 Mark II, even my Pen F, these settings are all virtually exactly the same. Now, some of the cameras have additional settings, like the Pen F has several additional settings, but we won't need to get into that. And if you do have a Pen F and you see these additional settings, after this tutorial, hopefully those additional settings will be logical and make sense, and you'll be able to use those without watching another tutorial. Okay, but let's go ahead and get started with the Olympus EM10 Mark II as the base camera. And there's a couple of ways to do black and white photography, right? You can take a color picture, then take it into any kind of software on your computer and just convert it to black and white. Or you can set the camera to black and white mode and take a picture. Okay, so let's just start with that. Let's just start with how to get into black and white mode. And it's very simple. You've probably already done it before. Okay, but it's simply here in the Super Control panel, and you just rotate this dial until you see the word, in this case, monotone. And now we're in monotone. And on the Pen F and the PL8 and my EM1, for some reason it says monochrome. I don't think there's really any difference. We're still talking about black and white photography on Olympus. But just note that this says monotone, this says monochrome, this says monochrome. I'm not sure why they changed the name, but let's go ahead and take a picture here, okay? And that's really all there is to doing black and white photography, right? No, not really. There's actually a lot more settings that we can get into. So let's talk about that. Now this time, when I go into black and white mode, I want you to watch very carefully what happens in the Super Control panel. Okay, because you might have missed it. We're in natural, right? Normal color picture. No big deal, right? We all do that. But watch what happens when I go into monotone. In particular, watch this RGB and watch this normal, the gradation icon. Okay, now that I'm in monotone, see how it switched? Let me go back. I'm in portrait mode, we have RGB, normal gradation. I'm in monotone, now we have F and T. So what does that mean? We have F, which stands for filter. Okay, then we have N, which is the filter mode, which is neutral. And then you'll see that we have T, okay? T means tint, and N is neutral again, okay? Let's start with the F, or filter. Okay, so I scroll down to it, I click OK, and we have 4 different filters. We have a yellow, an orange, a red, and a green, okay? Let's go into the red filter and take a picture. Okay, and you may have noticed when I was switching from yellow to orange to red to green that there were different tones in the black and white photo. Tones were changing, okay, to something either a little bit more contrasty or a little less contrasty. But let me explain what's happening or what the camera's trying to do. It's basically trying to imitate a red filter. And what is a red filter? Well, when you're shooting with black and white film on an SLR like this camera, all a red filter is literally a red filter like this that you would put on the front of your camera with black and white film in it. And I'm so good at this, but just like that. And then with black and white film you would take a picture with this red filter on it, and that's all this is trying to imitate. But what does a red filter do to a black and white image? Well, it's very, very simple, okay? Or the simplest way to think of it is anything that's red will be brighter, and anything that's not red will be darker. And what is not red? Well, blue is not red, green is not red. So, looking at this image again, okay, or up here, blue skies are going to be darker because they're not red. the green foliage, the trees and everything are going to be darker again because they're not red. And anything red will be brighter. And in this picture, there's nothing red. But let's talk about the blue skies and the green for now. Okay? When you look at this picture, okay, compared to the previous picture, side by side, you'll notice how much darker the blues are in the sky and how much darker the greens are in the trees and things, okay? And that's what a red filter does. But when you look in the camera's super control panel, there's also orange and yellow before that. And really, all those filters they're the same thing as red. They're going to pull down anything that's not orange or not yellow and make them a little darker. Again, we're still talking about the blues and the greens, but to a much lesser effect. So orange is going to have less effect on the blues and greens than red, and yellow is going to have even less effect on the blues and greens than the orange. So yellow is a very, very subtle effect. Orange having a little more than red being sort of the maximum effect that you can have in bringing the blues and the greens down. And, you know, we used red filters or film for black and white film photographers use red filters to really bring those skies in, because sometimes the skies are very bright, the clouds are very bright, and if you were to take a picture in black and white, sometimes those skies will look gray because they're just too white or they're too bright. So by putting a red filter on, you bring back that contrast between the blue skies and the white puffy clouds to make it look, you know, like you would expect it to if you were to take a black and white photo instead of something that's kind of all gray. Okay, and then again, you know, if you don't want to have the skies too dark, you go to orange, and if you're having good color already and you just want a little bit more punch in the skies and the greens, then you use the yellow. Another use for yellow and orange is doing like portrait works, because our skin tones have yellows and reds in them, right? And when you take a picture of a person using, say, yellow filter, they're going to be a little brighter. There's going to be a little more separation between them and the rest of the frame, right? So yellow filters are very common in black and white photography for portraits. And I'm sure there's like 1,000 other things that a black and white photographer could tell you the uses for these different colors. But, you know, to really make it simple, if you put a red or orange or yellow filter, anything that's not those colors are going to be darker, okay? And a real easy way to demonstrate this is, let's look at this red flower here. You can see the flower is very red, and then there's a background of sort of some greens and yellows, right? So now that you know what these filters do, it should be pretty easy to guess what's going to happen now, right? So I'm in neutral. Let's take a picture here. And we have basically a color picture converted to black and white. But when we apply a filter like yellow, let's watch what happens. Yellow is going to have a little subtle effect of raising the red colors and making them a little brighter. Orange is going to have a little bit more effect, right? And then red will have the most effect on the reds. Because now when I look at this picture, it would be hard for me to tell if this flower was originally red. I might even think it was originally a yellow flower, right? Because when you look at the red petals against the yellow center, they're virtually the same shade of light gray. So there's no way to tell what color this might be. But that, you know, maybe that's what you want, creatively speaking. So I think this demonstrates the difference between yellow, orange, and red the best, okay? Now, let's talk about the last filter, this green. Look what happens when I use the green filter. The green filter is no different than the red filter, except that what is it going to do? Anything that's not green is going to be darker, and anything that's green is going to be brighter. Same logic, just with green, okay? Now, let's take a picture here. Look how nice the petals look on the flower now. They have a lot more sort of punch and contrast and richness to it, especially against the yellow center of the flower, right? I think it looks so much better. So the green filter is best used with these kinds of pictures, right, where there's a lot of green foliage, but then there's a different color somewhere in that green foliage, particularly like flowers. So that's when I would use the green filter personally. And again, you know, if you do some research into black and white photography, you may find even more uses for the green filter than I can get into, because I'm not really a black and white photographer guy. But that's basically all it is. Now that you understand what these filters do, when you go out and take pictures, you can use them more creatively, I think, rather than just kind of guessing, why is the tone changing now when I use this filter or that filter? Well, now you know, okay? It's very, very simple, okay? Now, let's go back in and let's talk about the tint. Tint is the easiest one. All tint does, and let me change over to let's change over to this picture here. This is one of my real estate pictures. All tint does is add a color tone to the entire image. So now it adds the sepia, then we have a blue tint, we have a purple tint, and a green tint, right? And I have to assume that these represent some sort of film processing back in the day, and then sometimes they'd be a little blue, sometimes they'd be green or purple, whatever. But sepia definitely is a very old style film processing, and it had this very distinctive color, right? Okay, and that's all that does. So we'll take a picture here. So we have a nice black and white, or I guess technically we're calling it a monochrome in sepia, right? Monochrome meaning one, chrome meaning color. I looked it up, right? Thank God for Google. But this would be technically a monochrome picture versus monotone, which would be just black and white, I believe. Okay, now, that's really all there is there. The only other thing we can do is we can go back to this picture here, okay? And we can click on the highlight shadow button, which is by default the function 2. And then we can crank up the highlights. We can crush the shadows even more, right? And now we have a very contrasty picture. And let's pick a red filter, right? Because I want to really bring in those blue skies, make them almost black. And take a picture there and see how that looks. And you know, when I'm looking at it on the back of the camera, and I'll put it up here, that looks pretty good. I mean, I think even better than the original color picture that I took. So, you know, with the Olympus cameras, these are all of the black and white settings through the Super Control Panel, and you can get very, very creative, I think, just right in camera without having to do anything in software later. Okay, now let's talk about partial color. Okay, so I'm going to turn these back to neutral. It's a good habit, I think. Okay, partial color through the Super Control Panel is art filter number 14, and I know that because it says it right here, partial color, right? So let's look at this image now. What's happened? Now all of the colors have kind of gone muted a little bit, right? And partial color, if you've seen any samples, you know what it does. It brings out one color in particular and makes everything else kind of black and white, right? So if you're wearing a red tie, you know, the tie will be red, but then the rest of the person will be all black and white. But how do they do that exactly? Okay, so let's go, and if we click OK here again, we go into the art filter modes, but then you'll notice it says info here, select color. So if we, whoops, it was too slow. If we click the info button here, this dial comes up, and then we can rotate the front dial so that I'm really only pulling in the greens and making everything else black and white. So let's take a picture here and see how that looks. Okay, go into the Super Control Panel, click OK again, click the info button, and let's bring in just the blue skies this time, like that. Okay, And that's not bad. I mean, I'm still seeing a hint of greens or yellows here, but it's really pretty much eliminated all the rest of the colors except for the blues. And that's about all you can do with the partial color art filter in the Super Control panel. But like I said, there's more you can do if you go into art mode. Okay, so let's change into art mode by turning the mode dial to art. Okay, now we're still in partial color, and they have a couple of examples here. Okay, but if you notice, if I just click OK here, the same color dial comes up, right? And it picked up where we left off. But let's go to this picture again. Okay, you'll notice here there's a little right arrow. If we click this right arrow, we have additional settings for the partial color. Default being setting 1. There's setting 2. There's setting 3. So what's the difference between these three settings? Okay, if we go into setting 2 is basically taking a bigger piece of that pie in that color circle, right? It's just taking a little bigger piece of that pie. So if I move this color circle a little bit over to the reds, I've captured mostly the reds. Let's take a picture here. But you'll notice I still see a little bit of blues and greens in the background because look at the color circle again. We're getting closer to the blues and we're still a little bit on the greens, so it's taking almost half the circle in colors. And that's what number 2 is doing. Okay, let's go back in, click OK, click the right button. But number 3 is actually doing something a little different. Number 3 is taking a very narrow slice of that pie, or that exact color at that exact point. Because you'll notice if I take a picture now, based on where the color dial is on this red, it's only taking the reds and everything else is black and white. Okay, let's rotate the dial again. And when you're in art filter, the front dial just becomes the color. See how that changes? There's virtually no blue in this picture. Very, very little green. But there's some. Okay, we'll take a picture here. So looking at this again, you click the right arrow. And I can go back to 1, which is sort of the default, which is kind of a medium color pull. Number 2 is a very wide color pull, almost half that color circle. And number 2 is a very narrow, or almost a single point of that color circle and pulling that color. Okay, and it's probably you can't tell watching through this video, but when you're scrolling through these 3 different modes, the pictures here actually change slightly to kind of reflect what it's going to do. Okay, and then when I pick one, let's say I pick number 2, you'll notice there's a number 2 here in the bottom of the picture. Okay, to tell me which color mode or partial color mode that I'm in. Okay, let's go to this picture here. I like this picture. So you'll notice that I'm in number 2, so I'm pulling in a lot of the greens and yellows and oranges of my buddy Riley here. Okay, but there's more here. Right underneath there's an off. Okay, so we can scroll down to this. Now we can turn something on. So let's scroll over to the right, because you'll see there's a little right arrow here. And if I scroll down now, it'll tell me I can do a soft focus effect. I can do a pinhole effect, which is basically vignetting. I can do a white effect, which is basically vignetting but in white. I can add a frame. Starlight, I don't know exactly what that is. Then blurring effects for the top and bottom, or left and right. So let's just pick soft focus effect. Click OK. And then let me dial in So I capture more of the yellows and greens. Maybe right there. And let's take a picture there. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So that's some of the things you can do with that particular art filter. You don't have to do a selective single color, partial color to kind of get a nice picture. At least, you know, creatively speaking, I think this looks pretty good versus, you know, maybe if I were to really dial in a very tight color, which is number 3, and then, whoops, let me click over to the right, and instead of a soft, let's do a frame. Okay, and then let me rotate where I'm just getting the oranges. Yeah, right there. And see what that looks like. And now he's kind of all by himself there, right? And separate, and everything else is black and white. Okay. Alright, and that's pretty much it for the partial color, okay, and how that color wheel works. Let's go ahead and look at one other art filter, and that's the grainy black and white. Okay, again, same things, right? You have 2 different settings here. This is a very high contrast grainy, and this is a very sort of a still high contrast but less so. And you'll notice that these 2 pictures here change a little bit to kind of reflect what it's attempting to do. Okay, so let's pick something very high contrast, and then if I scroll down, what choices do I have here? I have pinhole effect, white edge effect, and frame. Let's do frame again. And if I scroll down again, look what's here. All of the black and white filters, neutral, yellow, orange, red, and green. Let's pick red this time. And then the last one is the picture tones, sepia, blue, just like in the Super Control panel. Let's pick sepia. Okay, and then I'm going to go to this picture. And then let me crank the ISO way up. Oops. See if I can do ISO 20,000 just to get a lot of grain. And it's a little bit too contrasty, so I'm going to go back to highlight and shadow. And just flatten that out a little bit. Okay, take a picture there. Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. Looks very old, right? That could have been taken 100 years ago, except for maybe all the cranes and everything. But in any case, that's basically how you kind of get around the different settings for black and white and for the partial art color filter. And I think that's pretty much it, or everything I need to show you. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below. As always, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for the very, very kind comments I've been getting. And hopefully you found this video helpful. And if you have any suggestions or would like to see other kinds of settings or things you want me to try to do tutorials on, just let me know and I'll do my best, okay? Hopefully we'll see you again soon.